Let's take this show on the road. Same-ish, different day. I'll be bored out my mind. Hometown, love my place. But
hey friends, let's dye some yarn. Today I am going to dye for a special project for myself. And I've got 3 skeins here of, let's see, it's 56% superwash extra fine merino and 44% super kid mohair. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to soak the yarn to make sure it's all wet. If it's not, the dye is not going to take. So I got my huge tub, soaking tub here. You don't need the big one like this. It was the only one I had free at the moment. So I'm going to soak the yarn in this one, and we're going to start by adding, let's see if we can find the opening anywhere. There we go. We're going to start by adding about half a tablespoon of citric acid. And the citric acid is to make sure the dye adheres to the yarn when you start dyeing. So I'm going to be adding more citric acid to the pan later also. And since I've only got 3 relatively small skeins, these are 100 gram skeins, that's a very fine yarn, I'm going to add 4 liters of water. Should be enough. There we go, to be able to soak these 3 skeins completely. And before putting them in the tub, we are going to put zip ties on each skein to make sure it doesn't tangle too easy. There we go. So I loosen up the skein and I just add a zip tie, like so. It also helps to detangle in case it does get slightly tangled while soaking, dyeing, or rinsing. And the second one, like so. And the third one. This is a very lovely yarn. I don't know if you can see it, but it has a slight halo. And we're going to be dyeing it in a single color in a canteen. There we go. Now I'm just going to gather them up. Like so. And we're going to put it in the soaking tub. There we go. And I'm squeezing it or pushing it down into the water to make sure everything gets soaked and wet. We do not want to have any dry patches of yarn. So we're helping the soaking process along a bit here. There we go. And now we're going to let this soak for at least half an hour, and then we'll be ready to start dyeing. The yarn has been soaking, excuse me, for about an hour, and we are ready to start dyeing. I'm going to dye this yarn in a canteen like this, instead of a big pan, which I usually do. This is easier to have control over, and also I only got 3 skeins that I'm going to dye. So I have prepared my tray here with the dye I'm going to use. I'm going to use Jacquard acid dyes in the sun yellow. I got an empty yogurt tub that I'm going to put some water in, a big spoon to poke the water or the yarn when I'm dyeing it, a teaspoon for grabbing the dye. And we are also going to have our mask, face mask, to protect our airways. This is a very fine powder and you don't want to accidentally breathe it in. We got some citric acid and we got some measuring cups with water. I've just added just a little bit in this one because I will be mixing the dye directly in the measuring cup this time. But first we're going to start by adding citric acid to the pan and putting the yarn also in the pan. I'm going to start off with adding about a tablespoon of citric acid to the pan. You need that to make sure the dye adheres to the yarn. You need the citric acid, you need the dye, and you need heat for the dye to stick to the yarn. Now I'm just going to grab my skeins. Just grab them by the zip tie. I'm squeezing out some of the water so I don't make a mess everywhere when I'm transferring them. I'm just putting it in the pan lengthwise. You can put it any way you like. I prefer this. I'm going to grab the second one. Squeezing out the water. Adding it to the pan. And the last one. There we go. And there we are. Next, we are going to mix the dye and we're going to start dyeing. Now we're ready to mix the dye. And before working with the dye, make sure to put on your mask. I'm going to do that now. And I'm going to grab my dye. And I am going to add a heaping teaspoon. I want there to be a lot of color in this. And I'm going to mix it. Make sure the powder dissolves completely. If the powder doesn't dissolve completely, you will have patches of darker yellow in some spaces. I want this to be a really nice and even yellow. There we go. I'm just going to put that there. Now I'm going to top off this with water to a full 2 liter, and we're going to add it to the pan. First, I'm going to add the water. Just pour it over. There we go. So, I've got 4 liters total here, which will be more than enough. And we're adding in the yellow. There we go. And I'm turning on the heat. And I will be using both of these to make sure I heat up all of the water and all of the yarn. If there are patches that do not get heated, the dye will not stick to the yarn in those spots. So it's very important that it gets evenly heated all over. There we go. I'm going to turn on the fan. Now making sure to especially poke the yarn in each end where the skein is looped, because there's a lot of fabric there, a lot of strands. And I want to make sure I get dye all the way in, and I do this for both sides. There we go. So now we just need to heat it up to make sure the dye sets. Now we'll be moving the pan around in different positions to make sure that everything gets heated. So the yarn is starting to heat up everywhere now. I don't know if you can see the steam coming off here. We are not looking for this to boil, we just want it to be properly hot, which is what makes the the dye in combination with citric acid to stick to the yarn. So what I do to make sure that the water is actually hot, and I do not recommend this, this is my method, I just put on my gloves and I poke the water, like so. And it is actually proper warm all over. So what we're going to do next is we're going to set it aside to cool completely before rinsing it. And this is very important. It has to cool completely before rinsing it, otherwise you will shock the yarn. And we do not want to do that. So setting it aside to cool, and once it has cooled completely, we'll come back and we'll rinse it. The yarn has cooled off completely, and it is time to rinse it. I'm using my plastic container here in the sink. You can also rinse directly in the sink if you like. I prefer using this one. And I'm adding in cold water, and I will be using soap to rinse my yarn. You can use dish soap, conditioner, shampoo, whatever you like. I prefer this one. So I'm adding in some of that. And we're going to fill this container about half full, I think. And we're going to start rinsing the yarn. It's looking very good. And you can see here in the pan, the water is clear, which means the dye has exhausted completely, which is what we're looking for. Doesn't always happen with some of the heavier dyes, dark blue, black, and so you may get some residue, but this is what we are working towards. Okay, there we are. I'm just grabbing the skein by the zip tie and I'm just squeezing out some of the excess. And I'm putting it in the rinsing bowl. I'm trying to put them down side by side so they don't tangle too much. There we go. I'm going to pour out this water. It has a light yellow hue, which is absolutely fine. Setting that aside. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to kick the camera. And we are getting ready to rinse. Let me move the camera a little bit first though. There we go. And I'm just pushing the yarn down into the water, not agitating it too much. I don't have to. And I don't want it to tangle. And I'm grabbing one of the zip ties. And I'm dunking it a few times in the water. Now I'm using soap, so I can really do this just once and be happy with that, but I always rinse my yarn twice, just to be on the safe side. This is a very gorgeous yellow. And the second one. We do have a little bit of residue. Always make sure to rinse the zip ties as well, because they will sometimes have specks of dye on them. Which is probably what is causing some of the leftover dye that we're seeing in the water right now. There we go. And I'm squeezing out the water. I'm not wringing the yarn or using any type of force, I'm just squeezing. There we go. I'll pour out this yarn and water. And we're adding in some more. The bowl is not dirty, it's just been stained from other yarns. It's perfectly clean even though it has this line in it. I'm going to add a little bit more. I want the yarn to have room to move about in the container. That's good. And we're adding the skeins back in. Trying to put them side by side, more or less. There we go. And just pushing them down into the water. And we're dunking it. There we go. And squeezing out the water. There we go. And the second one. Squeezing out the water again without bringing or using force. And the last one. There we go. Has a slight yellow hue still in the rinsing water. It's enhanced by the fact that the bowl is darkened inside. But I'm happy with this. There we go. Our yellow yarn is ready to dry, and I will dry this on a regular clothing rack. It'll take a couple of days. I will shift it around a little while drying it so that after the first 24 hours I'll be moving the zip tie a bit so that I don't have double yarn on the same spot all the time. It takes longer to dry. So I'm gonna go dry this now and get back when the yarn is dry and skinned. My gorgeous yellow is all done and dry and skinned up. And I will be using this to make a shawl. I'll probably post that later on the channel. I'm very happy with how this turned out. It's slightly variegated. We have some darker spots here and there, but it's looking very lovely, and I really, really love the result. So if you try to dye a single color yourself when hand dyeing, I would love to see it. So tag me in social media, and also if you knit something with it, tag me. I'd love to see what you make.